Well, to me, the most important part of this whole process will be the budget dollars, and I know we have some baseline dollars that are available, but we were somewhat surprised, I think, in seeing the large cuts to some of the egg programs that the president put out. I think if everybody up there could comment, are we going to be able to hold the budget, or are we going to write a farm bill based only on budget dollars? And I think that's the hugest challenge we face. Yeah. So I'd love to hear the comments from the senator's office and so forth on what they feel the budget dollars will be available for writing this next program. The alarm's not going to go off yet.
Waiting for the fire alarm. No, I mean, you're right, Mark. That's definitely the elephant in the room. Personally, I have a hard time taking what President Trump's top-down budget and take those numbers to heart. Say what you will about our commander-in-chief, he tends to put out a lot of different messages in a lot of different ways, and I think they can be taken to varying degrees of seriosity. From Senator Hoeven's perspective, and he sits on the Ag Appropriations Committee and chairs it, here's the deal. Production agriculture stepped up to the plate when we wrote the last farm bill. $23 billion savings, $104 billion over 10 years. We've done our part, and you know there's a lot of moving parts. I think we'll be able to, you know, come across as well as any agency. We're not going to be. I don't think we're going to allow ourselves to be singled out this time for a greater than proportional cut. I may, for my own credibility purposes, exempt the Department of Defense on that. But I think across the federal government, I think most agencies are going to be treated relatively fairly. I suspect USDA will come out better than, say, the Environmental Protection Agency. And overall, we're going to work to continue to fully fund programs that are important to farmers and ranchers. And we all talk about it, and we all know it. Senator Hoeven would hate me if I didn't remind you that what do farm programs do? Like, they provide some certainty, they provide some risk management for producers, but at the end of the day, you know what they do? They produce the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world. So why is a farm program important to people who live in Chicago or in Miami or in New York or in LA? Yeah, the nutrition title's big, but it also allows them to spend an incredible amount less of their annual budget on food. So they can buy the 56-inch TVs, they can lease the nice cars, they can send their kids to 2 soccer camps in the summer and wear cool shoes, all right? What we do in America works for the American consumer. Our challenge is to make sure it works for the American food producer as well. And we're going to continue to preach that message. And I think, knock on wood, that we'll be able to, you know, at least be treated fairly, again, across the board in relative terms with the other agencies.
Justin?
Yeah, little addition to that. I mean, I agree with everything Tom has to say. But one big factor in the budget, we think, you know, it's a 21% reduction to the USDA, which is about $4.7 billion. Pretty damaging to rural America. But Sonny Perdue wasn't in the room at that point in time. And Senator Heitkamp has high hopes that he's going to take the mantle up for agriculture and be someone who's going to be sitting at the table and protecting you know, agriculture in the United States. He even said so in his confirmation hearings. He was not at the table when the budget went through. So hopefully with him getting confirmed fairly soon, getting his team in place, that's something that he can sit in cabinet meetings and discuss with the president how important these ag dollars are for North Dakota and our rural America. So I think that's one of the big things to take out of this.
So if I could add to that, I agree with what both Tom and Justin said. Washington, D.C. is a different place today than it has ever been in my lifetime. It's much less predictable. So I agree with everything you said, but there's a big asterisk. At some point, particularly for the Republicans because they're in charge right now, They predominantly run on balancing budgets, on fiscal responsibility, on conservative blah, blah, blah spending. You can't blow the deficit on a repeated basis and keep saying that with credibility. And so that's the, now I think that's going to happen this time anyway. And, you know, all the things we said before, ag is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece. It hardly registers on these charts. But at some point, something's got to give in this system. That's my only point. And what that something is, I don't know. I just hope that it's not with agriculture. Okay, other questions?
Other questions, anybody? Again, you can either text them in if you want, or if you want, I can run over and make sure we get a microphone for you.
All right, we got one up here. We feel that the ARC PLC decision being made for the entire Farm Bill was too long. Farming conditions change constantly, and a safety net should, that's the end of it. Yeah, I'm guessing it's, you want to be able to make the choice year by year,
Right.
I'm assuming is the question. We probably, most of us as farmers would agree with that. Practically speaking, as a budgetary, I mean, that was a budget issue. If they'd have made everything, if they'd have let us make that election every year, the budget cost would have been significantly higher. The PLC reference prices would have all had to been lower, and the ARC payment calculation would have been reduced. It's the only way you could have done it and fit it within the budget confines. So that's why that decision was made. My guess is it'll be the same next time. I'd be really surprised if they change it to an annual election, but I'd be curious if you guys think differently.
Well, I haven't heard anything, you know, talking to folks in DC that that's going to change. I mean, it's something that comes up from time to time, but you know, like you said, it's something to do with budgetary issues, and it's just not one of those issues that we see coming up.
Yeah, traveling across the state, it's an issue that producers mention, certainly in positive forms. But as was mentioned, if it's something that we chose to do, it would significantly affect payment factors on the ARC side, on reference prices on the PLC side, to shoehorn it into the budgetary constraints. Now, that might be something we want to do. You know, we could probably run some numbers and come up with an idea pretty quick. I think Roger said that I suspect that at the start of the new farm bill that there will be another election option, so you can choose again for the length of this farm bill. You know, bear in mind that at the start of the current farm bill, kind of the concept behind it was, right, you're not going to get a payment every year, but when your production is off, when prices are low, that's when you're going to get one. So there was a mindset, I believe, at FSA in Washington, D.C. I'm trying to, they weren't being mean about it, but it was in their interest to have one or two counties in every state that didn't get a payment, right? To show people in urban areas that, see, this isn't your daddy's farm bill. This isn't direct payments to farmers. This is targeted payments to farmers who need help. So that narrative was important to the success of the last farm bill. So I want you to keep that in mind when we're talking about changes to current legislation, that we want to make sure that we target dollars to farmers and locations that experience you know, severe production losses. You know, price loss can't be limited to a location, so you're talking about total revenue. And we want to make sure that we have significant dollars available to help people in those instances. So lowering the dollars and spreading it out sometimes is in our best interest.
Okay. I'm going to read another one from here. If somebody wants to sort of stand up and holler, we'll take you as they come. But the next one here is, if nutrition becomes separated from the Farm Bill, how difficult will facilitation of conversation with urban members of Congress become?
I just want an on and off switch. I don't want a button with 3 different color of lights.
Just leave it alone.
The discussion of separating out nutrition was predominant on the House side during the last Farm Bill. It was never under serious discussion in the Senate, but just because of the structure of our seats, right? We cover a whole state, all the senators do. So it's kind of a different dynamic in the Senate. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to get into the discussion in front of anybody, because I think at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be in front of the Senate as a serious topic of discussion. If I were in the House, I think that'd be a completely appropriate question to ask, and it would be an interesting response.
So Tom is saying that you should keep that question and somebody ask it when Kevin Kramer is here for lunch. And I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I mean, that's something we don't support. Senator Heitkamp doesn't support that. She thinks that would kind of be an end to the Farm Bill in the Senate. Yeah. But I do know that I believe Senator Roberts mentioned in one of his speeches that that's just a non-starter on the Senate side.
Yeah.
So again, that is just a House issue that at this point in time.
This is an interesting dynamic. Some of you guys that have been around farm bills longer than I have, the last farm bill was the first one I can ever recall being written first in the Senate. Is that true? Jack is nodding his head. Farm bills have always started in the House, where it was easier to get them passed, and then moved to the Senate where, you have the melting pot, all that theory. What's that?
Freedom to Farm, did that start in Roberts in the Senate?
Roberts was in the House and Freedom to Farm. Oh. Yes. So they're always House initiatives. So last time was an anomaly. And I am not so sure that the Senate will be in a position to start this time, because they're already backlogged with, when you've got an incoming administration, the Ag Committee is going to be all tied up with all these confirmation hearings and all that sort of stuff. As you've heard, there's only one that's gone, well, it hasn't even gone through the floor yet, but it did go through the committee, and that's Sonny Perdue. But you've got all those undersecretaries and deputies that still have it. That's going to eat up some time. So I don't know where it's going to start this time. I don't know, but I will predict that it's going to be very difficult in the House again, like it was last time. It's just going to be very difficult. And the reason for that is because the Republican caucus is very divided in the House. And you've got these Tea Party, Freedom Caucus guys way out on the right that when they all stick together, they reduce the remainder of the Republican caucus to less than a majority. So they're sort of the tail wagging the dog, and unless they reach across and do something pretty significantly bipartisan, which farm bills historically have been, I don't know how they pass something out of the House. Now, that's a general statement on everything that happens in the House. Okay, other questions? Or any of you want to respond to what I said?
Another issue on timing, I think that we have to look at it on the House side. Chairman Conway is now leading up the Russia investigation. And I mean, that's going to take up some time. So, earlier in the year, people were trying to see if we can get a farm bill done 2017. That's something that's probably not going to happen. And like we said in this, in presentation, that's something that we're looking to make sure we get one done. But with Chairman Conway having pulled different directions, that's going to affect the timing as well.
Is there a need for integrated risk management farm bill to protect producers?
Yes.
That's what I...
Integrated risk management into a farm bill, is that trying to merge the commodity and crop insurance titles? Is that?
I don't know if that's what it means, but I think the answer is yes either way, so
okay.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's crop insurance.
Right, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody knows that farmers rely on crop insurance to get financing, to go to their bankers and say, look, worst case scenario, right, this is what happens. You're still going to get the money you gave me last year, or a portion of it. And that allows the banker to say, all right, go forth and plant your crop, which is great. Crop insurance is important, not only to the producer's bottom line, but as long as I'm here, I'm going to suck up to the crowd. We rely on crop insurance agents to help farmers make good decisions. If you talk about implementation of the last Farm Bill, Frayne, folks at NDSU did great work around the state doing informational meetings. But I would venture to say that over half the farmers that I work with on a daily basis got a majority of their information in terms of deciding between ARC and PLC, in terms of whether to rebase or not rebase, from their crop insurance agent. Now, so thank you for that, and I say that in terms of crop insurance being important, not only to the farmer's bottom line, it's an important tool for information dissemination from us to producers, and it's a great tool for farmers to use when they have a successful operation.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions that are spinning up here, so we're going to try and be a little quicker. Expand on baseline. Does $100 billion in savings that CBO is projecting have an impact on the Farm Bill's baseline? And how will this impact something else? I can't. But anyway, that's the question. The $100 billion in savings, how does that impact the baseline? Unless you guys want to answer it, I can. So the way it works is the baseline, all the baseline calculation is it assumes that the legislation that's in place today is the same legislation that continues into the future for at least the next 10 years, okay? Baseline calculations are 10-year calculations into the future. And so the fact that it saves $100 billion, that's just another guesstimate as to how much the Farm Bill is costing in the current, the way it's currently written. It doesn't, it's, in my opinion, it doesn't make any difference for the next Farm Bill. What matters for the next Farm Bill is if they're going to keep the same programs in place, think of your baseline as being zero. You either spend more than that or less than that. You got to hit the zero target. So if they're going to keep the same programs in place, you can do that with a zero change to your baseline. And so the fact that they're projecting at 30 savings or 100 savings is kind of an academic discussion. Okay? Any chance of updating bases or yields again?
Again, it's something that's been mentioned as we've held preliminary meetings with commodity groups and others. I certainly think there's a potential for doing it. Just like annual elections, though, we have to be careful about the impact on the cost of the program. CBO would run the numbers and they would give us a score on it. If it's something that's too expensive that would cause us to reduce payment factors on ARC or target prices on PLC, we would have a little tougher sell on it. I think got to think that through. I would guess redoing, recalculating yields might be more popular than rebasing. I suspect a lot of people rebased last year and probably haven't made a lot of changes, so that might not be as popular, particularly in North Dakota. But it's something that, again, we're looking at all these options. When we get serious about Farm Bill, we'll run scores and see where the coalitions lie. But all those in terms of another bite at the apple, in terms of an election, in terms of rebasing, in terms of recalculating yields. And again, I suspect we'll have a discussion on annual elections, but in my own personal opinion, I think that that's going to cause the payment factors to be so low, the target prices to be reduced so much that it probably is going to be a non-starter in terms of getting enough votes to move that forward.
When the panel on trade and conservation is up later today, you might want to repeat that question. My guess is that the House is going to update bases, but that's because there was a lot of discussion in the House to actually go to actual plant it and do the calculations on that. That's kind of a non-starter, but the next best thing to that is update all the bases, then at least you're pretty close to what folks are doing. Cool. I got a couple questions here on country of origin labeling. Will it be in the next farm bill? Why or why not? It's an interesting question. Farmers Union has long been a supporter of cool. My guess is it won't. I don't know. That's a tough one. I think it is likely that it won't be in the farm bill. Both these guys as bosses are big supporters of cool. What happens if anything happens in the Senate, that would be where it would happen probably. But Chairman Roberts is not a fan of it, so I think that makes it a non-starter there. The big variable here is what does the administration want to do? Because with all the talk about sort of trade and sort of that confusing message that's coming out of the White House, some are hearing that message to be, we want, it's sort of this make America great again kind of stuff. Let's look inward. Let's be sure that we, put our name on everything. That would argue that they ought to be supporting cool. And so that's the big variable. But if it were left just to Congress, my guess is both chairmen would not be fans of it. And so it would have to be a minority play somehow. That's my guess. You guys have a different view?
No, I haven't seen a lot of traction for something like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We got about 5 minutes to wrap up. Is there one live question from the floor? Yeah, right up front.
Specifically regarding crop insurance, where is the target? Where does the target lie? Is it on? You mentioned it a little bit. Subsidies.
You mean where they would make the cuts?
Correct. Yes, subsidies represent nearly 70% of the farmer's premium. That's substantial. If that's gone in any way, that changes the game for the farmers. Is the public-private partnership with regards to the distribution of crop insurance still cool? Is everybody down with that? There's 8 companies that distribute that. Is that at risk at all?
Do you guys want to answer? I'm happy to, but.
Well, I'll maybe talk around your question and come back to me if I don't get it. I think at the end of the day, we're going to see, if we lost the battle and there had to be cuts to crop insurance, you'd see a couple things. You'd see a decline in the proportion and the amount of subsidy that went out. I think you would probably see a greater push, maybe with more success, to fit those constraints on limiting subsidies that went out to on the basis of adjusted gross income and things like that. And then, there might be a push to renegotiate the agreement with crop insurance companies in terms of compensation to when I say producers, to insurance agents. So you kind of have those 3 things all at play. Again, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think it's important when you talk about income limits, and I don't know that my boss has staked out a firm position, but philosophically speaking, again, we want the crop insurance program available to the most producers that we can to expand that risk pool. And sometimes it's easy to say, well, if they're really big producers, then they don't need our help. And there might be a certain amount of truth in that, but at the end of the day, a lot of times those are precisely the acres that you want in your risk pool, because sometimes they're at a lower risk than some other ones. So, we just need to be very careful when we do make changes to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the long-term viability of that risk pool and of the insurance program as a whole. And I already spoke to what I think is a valuable contribution made by agents. You start reducing the compensation that goes out to them, then we have to find a different way to get information to producers and let producers make good calls. So, there's a couple different ways to do it, but I think all in all, hopefully, we can keep Sheehan and Flake, maybe misdirect them and have them attack something else for a while.
Okay.
And I think in 2015, that's where that attack lied, was with regard to providing compensation to agents. I think that's where the cuts were coming from there. So, if that was what was done in the past, maybe that's something we need to look at and keep our eye out for.
So my guess is really kind of a 2-part question. The distribution piece is easy. I don't think Congress has any appetite to change the distribution of crop insurance and to have it being sold through FSA, for example, which is sort of the thing that gets talked about every now and then when a farm bill rolls around. It's going to stay with the agents the way it is. If there is a serious budget cutting effort, and if the committees are charged with writing a farm bill with a smaller baseline, having to make cuts, it's really kind of hard to imagine how they would do that without taking something out of crop insurance. Just because it's, after nutrition, it's the biggest single component. Conservation's already such a small sliver that if you take much there, it doesn't count for all that much. So my guess is they nibble a little bit out of every one of those places. And if that's the case, it'll come in one or two places. The most likely place is the overall subsidy to the farmer would be reduced slightly, okay? And the next most likely place is, in the last farm bill, both houses, one way or another, passed amendments to the farm bill to reduce the payments to the biggest farmers. Either there are lots of different ideas that are floating around out there, but it's to your point about there's an argument that if you're a farmer who's farming the whole county, does the taxpayer need to subsidize the whole county, or is maybe half of the county enough? That's the argument that will be made, more than likely. It's an argument that attracts a bunch of urban voters too. And so it would be one of those two places. That'd be my guess.